Thank you so much for this invite today, and I'm very excited to talk about kind of share my journey doing this throughout this PhD application process. And also, since we are a pretty small group, I think I would like for this to be more conversational instead of just like me throwing a lot of information at you. I think you can pretty much Google a lot of this information. So I'm going to try to personalize this as much as I can and try to answer questions as I go. So feel free to interrupt me and like ask me questions as I'm sharing my story. So I will start off by sharing my screen with you actually. Okay, looks like that sharing is not turned on. Okay, I sent you a request. Okay, I can share now. Mhm. All right. Can you guys see my slide properly?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I was going to start off with a brief introduction of myself, but looks like Rafi has already done that for me. Yeah, so I'm Sambina. I moved to UBC in 2018 to pursue my undergraduate degree here from Bangladesh. I did a combined honors in computer science and biology. And throughout my degree, I was trying to get experience in different areas, and both in computer science and biology, and trying to see how I can get more experience in this intersection. And so I know Rafi already gave like a very brief background of myself, but I guess I can give you a little bit more details about how I came to find like kind of exactly what research area and what questions I was interested to pursue for my PhD. So when I first joined UBC, I didn't really know bioinformatics as a degree option or as a program option. And so I thought that I'm going to be doing a biotechnology degree because I think that's what's a more popular known major option in Bangladesh. However, when I came here, I learned that the biotech program at UBC was not going to be covered by my scholarship because it is a very interesting program here where you have to do this degree with two different universities in BC. And so my scholarship didn't allow me to do that. And they were like, okay, you only have to take classes within UBC. And so my one of my academic advisor at the time recommended that, oh, well, don't you just start taking classes and like maybe just start doing some computer science classes and see how you like that. And maybe you can pursue some combined degree. And so that's kind of how I got into this field, really just like by chance. And I did a few like programming classes in my first year and I quite liked it. And I decided that, oh, you know what, maybe I will do this combined degree. It is also like when I started in 2018, I think bioinformatics was not as popular at UBC either. I was part of only three people who graduated with the same degree as me. And so it was pretty interesting kind of creating my own journey as I went. And so as part of my program, we also have something called a co-op where you do an internship with a lab or you do an internship like for 16 months while you're doing your undergrad. And for that, at first, I really wanted to see what the bioinformatics research area looked like, which is why I joined Dr. Inaj Birol's lab at BC Genome Sciences Center, which is basically this research institute here that's affiliated with UBC. And that is kind of when I started my first ever research experience. I was basically working with a master's student in the lab, and we were interested in looking at antimicrobial peptides and how we can create this pipeline that can mine for antimicrobial peptides. So when I joined that lab, even though I knew how to program, it was a very, very steep learning curve for me. And I really enjoyed the process of doing the research work that I was doing. Like I knew that, oh, you ask a question and then you go ahead and you read a lot of papers and then you try to find the answer to that question. And that process was something that I really enjoyed. And I felt like, okay, I want to do more of research work. But for my next co-op, I wanted to kind of explore how the industrial research scene looked like before I committed to doing academic research forever. And the other thing was I also wanted to get some experience doing experimental research because my previous experience was just doing purely computational work. And so I kind of wanted to explore a bit more there and went ahead and did my co-op at Amgen, which is this pharmaceutical company here in Vancouver, where I kind of did my next internship. And the reason why I'm kind of like explaining a bit of my thought process behind how I selected each of my experiences throughout my undergrad is because I think that really helped me narrow down what research niche I wanted to do for my PhD or do for my graduate studies. So like throughout my different experiences, I kind of noted down what are some of the things I liked, what are some of the things I didn't like, or like, does it make sense for me to do another 5 to 6 year long degree? Which is what I wanted to start this presentation with today was whether or not graduate school is even the right choice for you. And I think throughout the different experiences that I had, I was always asking myself, like, is this something that I see myself doing for kind of like the rest of my career? Or what is something out of this experience that I'm enjoying versus I don't want to continue doing? For example, when I was working at Amgen, I realized I did not like working in an experimental lab. Like I want to do more computational work. So that was very useful for me. And for all of the experiences that I had afterwards, I just completely didn't want to do any more experimental research. And so, since I am kind of assuming that you all are interested in applying for graduate school or are in the process of applying for graduate school, I really encourage you all to sit down and reflect on some of these questions that I think was very helpful for me when I was trying to narrow down whether graduate school was the right choice for myself. The first one is obviously, what are your end goals, or what is the career that you're aspiring to have? Oftentimes, you might hear people saying that a PhD makes you overqualified for what you want to do. And a big reason for why people tend to say that is because you might have you might have decided that you want to do something so not relevant to doing research where a PhD was not really required on the first place. I can give you an example of that. So if let's say you plan on becoming a software engineer, then maybe you don't need a PhD. Maybe doing a master's degree might be enough, or not even that. Maybe with an undergraduate degree, you can get the career and you can get the jobs that you're looking for. And so really reflecting on what are your end goals and what career are you aspiring to have in the long run is very, very important. Like I completely also want to acknowledge that career choices and career trajectories obviously might change. It might be like, midway through your PhD, you might decide that research is not the right thing for you want to do. You don't want to do anything related to what you did in your PhD. A lot of people do that, completely valid. But at the same time, before you're making such a huge commitment to doing another degree after your undergrad, you definitely want to make sure that your current goals are aligned with the decision that you're making in terms of doing this degree. And so one thing I actually quite like doing sometimes is that I will try to talk to people who are currently doing jobs or are in current positions that I want to have. Let's say if I want to become a principal scientist at like at a pharmaceutical company, I will ask them like, oh, did you think you needed a PhD to get here today? Or like, let's say I meet someone who is a group leader who might not necessarily be a professor, but they're leading a group at an academic institute. And if I see myself wanting to do that, I'll ask them like, hey, do you think you needed a PhD to do this? Oftentimes, it's also quite valuable nowadays to look through job postings on LinkedIn that you think are very closely aligned with your interest. And you can just look through the requirements list there and see what are the things that they want to find from you, right? And I think that is something that's really useful before you decide that a PhD slash doing a master's is something that you want to do. Right, so like that kind of next brings me to the next point where maybe you don't really need to do a PhD. Maybe a master's is good enough for your goals. Another thing is you should really be reflecting on what areas of your life you need to sacrifice while you're pursuing the graduate degree, in terms of financial things, in terms of moving to a different place. If you are like, what does it mean for your friends and family relationships, like all of those things, you should really be thinking about what kind of sacrifices you're willing to make to do this graduate degree. Oftentimes, I think after talking to a lot of people, I learned that people really underestimate how much the financial burden can build up over time during your graduate school. And I think that is something you should definitely take into account before making this commitment. The other two things that I wanted to mention is what are the skill set that you're looking to learn that you think you need to do a PhD for? And that is very closely also related to the first point, where what are your end goals or what are your aspiring career? Where I think you should think about what are some of the skills that you definitely plan on learning. And yeah, like, and I guess that also sort of like links to if you really need to do, like, how long of a degree do you want to do? And the reasoning for this fifth point, especially, is that some countries tend to have a much longer degree than others. In Europe, PhDs are typically around 3 to 5 years, 3 to 4 years. In US, however, 6 years is the average for a lot of schools. So you should be thinking about that before you commit to a degree in a country. Does anyone have any questions? I feel like I've been talking for a while, but I hope that kind of like brings that point
I
home.
have a question.
Yes.
Actually, the first one is the toughest question I'm encountering right now. So, how to decode that? What are my end goals or
Sorry, I can't
aspiring
hear you
career?
properly. Is it just me?
I guess one second.
Can you repeat, maybe?
Is it okay right now?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of background noise, but can you, yeah, maybe let's try
You
it.
can write them in the chat. Yes.
Okay, that might be better. Thank you.
Yeah, there was some background noise. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, so okay. So in terms of breaking it down for you, okay, I can maybe kind of share what my thought process was like. So for me, when I was trying to decide like what are the aspiring careers for me, which is why I was kind of talking about my previous work experience in more details. So after all of the different research positions and all the different experiences I had decided that I want to work in machine learning and genomics. Like this is the niche area of research that I want to continue working on. I am still not 100% sure if I'm going to be committing to staying in academia or becoming a professor, but like, or joining industry as a research scientist, but I know that I want to continue doing research. And so for that, it makes sense that for any kind of like a research leading role, I would need to get a PhD. The other thing for me was also that I started looking at some like some job postings on LinkedIn that I would think that, oh, I would love to do this job, or like, oh, this is something that really closely aligns with my like future career or what I see myself doing on a day-to-day basis. And so that was also another thing that kind of made me decide that, okay, the PhD is what I need to do. I also did a lot of networking at conferences where I spoke to a lot of people about this, and that's kind of where like I tried to use that networking opportunities to see people who are currently in roles that I would like to be in the future. What kind of experiences do they have, and what can I basically do to get myself to their level? So that's kind of how I decided. It is a very challenging process to like break it down. I would say that I really deliberately tried to try out different things. As you can see from my previous experience, like I went and worked at PwC in consulting for a little bit because I was not sure if doing a corporate thing would be a better option for me compared to doing a research career. And all of that was just so that I can really hone it down that what I see myself doing in the future and also what kind of values I have and what I see myself getting out of my work. I think that part about wanting to live a more value guided life is kind of where I decided that a corporate career was not for me and I wanted to do more research oriented work. Does that help? I just kind of shared my experience, but
And Sambina, I'm not sure whether you're going to talk about this later, but like, are you going to talk about the, how are you going to select
yeah,
select any specific field?
yeah. I have this. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this was basically just like I think this was something that I think a lot of people don't do enough, which is why I'm spending a lot of time on this because I think a lot of people that I've spoken to who are currently in grad school, they're like, "Oh, I was in undergrad. The next step is just to do a master's, or the next step was to just do a PhD." So I just decided to apply for it because everyone else was applying for it. And I just think that is not the right thing to do when doing a graduate degree comes with so many different sacrifices that you're making in life. So you should really be making a better informed decision. Okay. I hope that helps, Benita. If it, wait, there's another question.
So I'll just read the question.
Yeah. Okay.
It just for the purpose of recording. So how to imagine my future career without having the exposures as you see? We don't get to have those type of exposure like internship or industry experience during undergrad in Bangladesh. In my third year, I'm having difficulties to narrow down my choices.
Yeah, that is really difficult. I think I would definitely acknowledge that I was very lucky that I was in Canada where I got to do a lot of these internships. I will say though that because the world is in such with things being so much more virtual and having a lot of those opportunities, and you're in your third year, and I think now is definitely the time where you should be looking at like if you don't find enough of these opportunities in Bangladesh, you should try to find a professor online who you can work virtually. Like there are so many remote positions available that I think that could definitely help you to get some of these exposures. Like during my first year when I didn't really have any experience and I was also in Bangladesh for a long time, I was trying to basically just cold email professors from a lot of different universities around the world so I could just maybe do a volunteering in their lab for 4 months. So I think if you can really use those resources available for you to get those opportunities, that can definitely help you a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to add something is that, so it's true that in Bangladesh, you don't have similar internship opportunities. I did my undergrad in Bangladesh and I didn't have the similar opportunities. So what I did, I actually found the professor in my university was working on things that I found interesting. And so I went to him and I just basically tried to work with him on the ongoing projects. So this is one thing that you can pursue, just try to find professors who are working the topic that you find interesting. Also, even here, when undergrads work in labs through co-ops or anything, mostly actually they're going to work with the graduate students in the lab. Highly unlikely that the PI is gonna supervise the undergrad directly. And you through this mentorship program, actually you have the same opportunity where you are going to work with masters or PhD students who are in these universities who are mentoring undergrads from Canada or United States. So you actually have this opportunity, have the same opportunity to work with them. Yeah. And I think Sambina is also going to join as a mentor, so you can also work with her maybe in the next mentorship term.
All right, so let's move on. So once you have decided that yes, graduate school is what you want to do, you should now decide what program you are going to go for. Should you be doing a master's or do you want to do a PhD? In a lot of countries, they require you to have a master's before you do a PhD. That's usually in Europe or I believe also in Australia. In North America, however, directly most people go into a PhD program from their undergrad, especially in US. In Canada, there's this option where you start in the master's program and you can transfer into a PhD program. So there's all of those different options that I think you should like take some time to narrow down. Within your master's programs, there's also like the professional programs that you can do. If you're interested in doing epidemiology or like health sciences work, there's the MPH program. If you're interested in more engineering degrees, there's the MEng program. There's also a difference between like the course-based masters versus a research-based masters, where you basically have to like work in a lab and like write your own thesis versus just doing courses similar to how you do in undergrad. One caveat to doing the course-based masters is definitely that there's a lot fewer funding available, and you usually have to pay for a tuition fee when you're doing that. Versus in a research masters, they tend to be usually covered by the lab that you will be going into. So there's a lot of those factors that you should be considering before you decide that which specific program that you want to be going for. Yeah, I'm sure there is more. Like I think there is the MPhil program that is what I've seen in UK, but mostly in North America, among the programs that I've looked at, these were some of the options that I saw. Now for application components, they usually come with like you need to write your research statement, a letter of recommendation from 3 research advisors. That's been the case for all the schools that I've applied to. And you need to submit like a CV or like a resume and your transcript. Now, I don't want to spend too much time going into like, oh, how do you write the best research statement? How do you write how do you make a really good CV? I think those deserve their own seminars. But one thing for sure is that make sure that your research statement is very, very personal. Like it has to be very authentic for you to stand out. And definitely ask people to give you feedback. And I think this mentorship program is really amazing where you can ask a lot of these people who have gone through the application process to help you review some of these personal statements. I'm also always happy to, even if you're not a current mentee, I'm always happy to look at and give feedback to personal statements. So definitely get a lot of feedback on them. Make sure it's really good. I don't believe that personal statement can be the only component that can help you like stand out, but it's definitely a very important piece because it's what you're using to tell your story, your entire life story in just 500 words or to just in just 1 page. So it's very important that you make sure that this story is crafted really well. And I think the other components of this should be pretty easy to understand. I think the letter of recommendations, from what I've seen, people tend to like it more if it's from like a research advisor that you have had instead of a course professor. But if you don't have enough research advisor, you can definitely ask a course professor. Do make sure that your letter of recommendation is also very, very personal. Like you don't want the professor to just say that, oh, he's a good student. Like it needs to like stand out as well to the committee. And it definitely also really helps if you're like the field that you're applying within, you already have worked with someone who is well known within that field, and that person is writing a letter of recommendation, which kind of brings me back to the previous thing I was mentioning, that if you can get yourself exposed to different experiences and work even virtually with professors around the world, that can really help you get really good letter of recommendations. Now, finding the right lab fit. So from here onwards, I'm going to assume that you are either interested in applying for a research-based master's or a PhD, because otherwise a lab fit is not super important for you when you're applying for a graduate degree. So these are some of the questions that I had asked the people that I was interviewing with. because I really wanted to make sure that the lab was a good fit for me. While I was doing my different experiences, I also kind of started to learn what style of supervision and what kind of lab environment suits me well, that can help me succeed. And so, some of the things that were important to me was that I get to meet my supervisor at least once every few weeks. Like, I was not okay with seeing my supervisor once a year. And so I really like wrote down what were some of the priorities that I had, and what labs kind of aligned with those priorities. And so I will just like go over these questions that I had asked, and you guys can also ask me any questions like why I think this is important. So the first point is about like, oh, how often do you meet your students? It was very, very important to me to understand whether or not the supervisor is hands-on or hands-off, and that can make a great deal of difference in your PhD experience. If you're someone who likes to work by yourself and you don't want your supervisor to ever to give you feedback for like months, you can totally go with like someone who's more very, very hands off. Versus if you're someone who needs feedback like every week, every other week, that is something you should figure out like what is the working style that you prefer. If you're someone who's like, oh, I'm very much likely to procrastinate, so I want my supervisor to be very, very hands on, to always message me and like, really push me. So those are some things that you can figure out by asking them this. And by the way, these are questions that I directly ask them during the interviews, and they're always happy to share more information about their lab, about their supervision style, because they know that they also want you to succeed in their lab, and they really want to make sure that you would be a good fit for them as well. The other point was like, how many papers do you need from them before they can graduate? And the reason why that's important is because you really want to make sure that you're not, there are some very interesting criteria that a lot of supervisors have. Like if they're like, oh, I want you to have 5 papers, that might mean that I will take a really long time to do my PhD versus like I want to do a much shorter PhD. So this information can really help me understand that. Also about like, oh, what's the average number of years your previous students took to graduate? That information can also help you understand like, oh, how fast does he like to work with his students? Like how many papers do they need? Or this is also something that I think can really vary between experimental and dry lab work. And so you should also take that into account before you completely like make a decision based off of that. The other things where what are some of the potential projects I can do, and like, what kind of funding do you have? This is going to be another really, really important thing going forward, because there has been a lot of funding issues in academia in North America. And so you really should be asking the supervisors like, oh, what is your funding situation? And they will be honest with you, because otherwise they're making that commitment and they might expect you to get fellowships in your second year. And if you don't get that, what happens? Do you have to transfer out of your PhD program? Those are all some conversations that you should have before you commit to the lab. The other point that was quite important to me was kind of understanding what does the lab alumni do, or like what is the lab and like working environment, and like where do most people end up going from here. And I think that is going to be important if you're someone who already really knows what like your future career goals are, which is what I was talking about in the previous slide. Like, oh, if you want to go into academia, do you think most people from this lab ends up going into academia? Like, what's the percentage of people who ends up going into industry? It's much easier to network once you have your lab alumni in specific places. And so really having that honed down can be very helpful for your future. And so these were some of the questions that I asked them, that I was trying to see whether I would be a good fit in their lab and like how I would be working with them. The other thing is you should also think about whether or not you want to work in a smaller lab versus a bigger lab. Because if you're in a smaller lab, it might mean that the professor has a lot more time to give you very direct feedback and give you very hands-on mentorship, versus in a much larger lab, it might be very difficult. But at the same time, it might increase your chances of being able to collaborate with other people in the lab. So another really good thing that I thought was useful for me to learn. But does anyone have any questions? Okay, I'm gonna think that no one has a question. But yeah, I think those are definitely some very useful things that helped
I have
me.
a question.
Yeah.
What about choosing a professor who is like probably very early in the career, so you don't have all this data?
Yeah, so I think for like a professor who's very early on in their career, what I was trying to figure out is like what are their future goals, if that makes sense. Like if there's someone who's just starting out as a professor this year, I would be like, okay, like what do you look for in your like what do you think you're going to be looking for in your students? And for me to understand what their working style would be like, I just asked them like, oh, what was your previous experience like in your postdoc lab? If you had mentored, let's say like an undergrad, how was that experience? It is quite difficult to understand a lot of this information if they're just starting out. I will say though that I did not want to join a lab that is just starting this fall, and so I was trying to filter out by that a lot because I kind of wasn't sure if I wanted to spend a lot of time going through the setup of the lab, and I wanted to join a lab that has already been around for at least a year or two. So that definitely helped me in like getting answers for some of my questions. But yeah, that's a good point. That's also another thing that you should be careful about. Like if a professor is starting out right now, it might be really good for you, or it might also mean that they might put a lot of pressure on you because they're so early on in their career that your success, like their success is super closely tied to your success. And so they might be someone who might be more micromanaging and might expect a lot more from you versus someone who's already tenured, and like how many papers you get doesn't determine whether or not they're going to be tenured, things like that. Obviously this is not 100% true for everyone's case, but this was just things I learned while I was interviewing. So definitely do your own research. I don't think there is like a specific trend that you can just apply to everyone. Yeah.
So I have a question. Does the country of origin of the supervisor matters?
So I don't think it should matter. But here's the thing though. If you think that, let's say, your English speaking skills are very, very good, then you might want to work with supervisor where you don't have that much of a language barrier. Versus you're someone who's like, oh, my English isn't that great. Or like, I think the language barrier might be something that you should take into account. Other than that, I think country of origin of supervisor shouldn't be something that should set apart how they supervise you.
Well, I've seen some stigma against Chinese and Indian supervisors in online, so I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of what I was mentioning, that you should do the research with the lab that you're talking to, which is where like sometimes it can be useful to like talk to the current lab members. Like for example, if you were worried about joining a specific professor, or like a specific professor from a specific nationality, you can always just ask other people in the lab like, hey, because you're not from the same nationality as the supervisor, did you ever feel like racially discriminated? I would hope not. Unfortunately, while I was interviewing, I have had experience of people being quite racist to me. But I think that is why it's very important that you also talk to the current lab members before you make that commitment. But yeah, like I think there are also a lot of really amazing people from all different countries, and I don't think you should be limiting yourself while you're choosing your supervisor just because they're from that country, right? You should be doing your research. You should talk to the current lab members there and see if there has been any past racial discrimination. Does that answer
Yeah,
your
thanks.
Yeah. But I personally think that like language barrier is probably one of the biggest ones. Oh, well, I decided to not go to that university because even though I loved the professor's research, I just decided that I cannot be working in this environment. So I just decided to turn down that offer. That's how, sorry, I didn't repeat the question. The question was, how did you manage the racism attitude of people towards you? But yeah, which is why like during the interview, a lot of these things can come up when you're talking to other lab members, when you're talking to the professors, which is why it's so important that, you don't just apply for a PhD, accept the best ranking university offer, go and just go for it. You should really be thinking all of these things through because, your PhD is a long journey. You don't want to be in a lab for 6 years where they're racist towards you, right? All right, so
So, how should I contact the lab members of the supervisor, and
yeah.
will they cooperate with me?
Yeah,
Like,
so the lab,
will they be open or not?
yeah, so usually from my experience, if the lab members have a strong opinion versus like if they have a strong opinion or if they have like, if they have good opinions, they have been very, very open to sharing their things. So usually what I did is I went to the lab website. I went ahead and like, found maybe like 4 or 5 people and I messaged them all on LinkedIn being like, hey, I'm interviewing with this lab right now. I'm interested in joining. Do you think we can have a chat? And like they shared everything that I needed to know from them. If you feel like that, oh, like when you're talking to that person, they're trying to not give you any information. You can also reach out to ex-students because they don't have anything to lose. They are oftentimes a really good point of information for you. Like they're going to be very honest with you. They're not going to usually they're not going to cover things up. A lot of the times the professors also offered me to like meet their students. Like in my current lab, we always do meet like whoever is like incoming graduate student or like incoming postdoc. We always try to meet them before they're hired because lab fit is also super important for everyone in the lab. Yeah, I think from my experience, everyone has been very information, like they have been very open to sharing their experience. So I think you should definitely try doing that. Okay. Now, moving on to the next point. So now that you have picked some of the labs, you should also be looking at how you want to shortlist the schools that you want to apply for. The number one point that I actually wasn't fully aware of before I started my application process is that how few spots there are for international students in a lot of schools. A lot of the ones that I was applying to, midway through my application, I learned that they usually take 1 or 0 students, or some of the programs are only for domestic students. So that really saved me the money that I would have spent on applying there. So this is something you should definitely try to ask either the admissions officer, or the other really good way of finding out about how many international student spots there are is that all the schools, they tend to have like an open house / an information session before the application deadline. And there you can always ask them the question like, oh, how many international students do you guys have spots for? And they will just tell you, or just email them and they will tell you. They can be like, oh, so we only have like 1 spot, or we don't really differentiate between international versus domestic students. So that is something that you can do. You can also just ask the labs that you're interviewing with or that you're interested in. Like, hey, do you think the school takes both international and domestics equally? That can save you so much time and money when you're applying. Like you might be thinking that, oh, I'm applying to 15 schools, but half of them might only have one spot for international students per year. That makes the competition insane, and it might not even be worth it for you to spend the 200 USD, which is almost like 12,000 BDT, towards just that one application. So I really think that would be important for you to, I think I did the math wrong. I think I converted to CAD, but anyways, it's almost like 20K BDT to apply to some of these schools. So you really should make that judgment call for yourself. Like, is it worth it for me to apply to a school that might not take any international student this year? All right. The next point is how many labs are in this program that I'm actually interested to work with. This was another like criteria that I used to remove a lot of the schools because I already knew that I wanted to work in machine learning and I wanted to work with genomics. I knew that I only wanted to find labs that are doing kind of like similarish research. And so for me, it was important that there are actually enough people in the school or in the program that I can do my area of research with. The other point that I'll make here is that if a school has only one person that you would ever want to work with, it might not be worth it for you to apply to that school. And the reason behind that is, what if this person is not taking a student next year? Is it really worth it for you to make all this transition from Bangladesh, come here, and then you join here and you realize, oh, the person you moved here for isn't really going to be taking students. Now, what do? You are now stuck in this program and you just have to do a research in a lab that you're not even interested in. So, as a rule of thumb, I was trying to make sure that at least there's like 2 to 3 labs that are doing things that I'm interested in before I apply to that school. Some of the very like niche research or like very niche research institutes, this might be very difficult. There might be just one person that you absolutely want to work with. Like, sure, go ahead, do that, make that application because you like really, really want to work with them. But other than that, I think that it's a safe bet to make that you apply to a school that has multiple people that you want to work with. Like, what if you go in there and the supervisor is just absolutely toxic? What do you do now? That was the only lab that you wanted to work with, right? Another really, this really like halved down my list of schools because also like since I was also working in the research area that I wanted to continue doing for my PhD, I was trying to kind of narrow down by like, people in the field, people whose papers I read, like things like that. Now, the other point was the next thing is also where is the school located? Geographically, which city, which country, because you're going to be living there for 6 years. You don't want to be in a city or in a country that you're going to hate because that's going to make your PhD so much harder. Um, the the other 3 points here are, yeah, like what other alternative programs that you can look into the same school. So this was actually something that I had to learn while I was interviewing, that a lot of the PIs, they might only want to take one student from one program, but actually more students from a different program because they might be affiliated with multiple different programs. Now, the catch here that I didn't really realize this before, this was a mistake from my application, and I hope that people will learn from this, is that let's say when I was applying for computational biology programs, some schools only had 5 spots for the entire program. Versus if I had applied to the computer science department, they were taking in like 10 students. So like that kind of would like increase your chances of going to that school or working with that PI if you can work with the same set of labs. Whichever program you decide to choose is going to stay the same, right? So look into what alternative programs you can apply to into the same school if your first choice of program is very selective or like, might only take 4 to 5 people. And the other points were about whether the current students are happy that they chose this program. Usually I learn this information through doing interviews because in most schools during the interviews, you're required to go and meet like current students and like talk to current students. And so that really helps you understand, like, oh, do they like this program? What is their biggest complaint about the program? And am I okay with the big thing that people are complaining about this program? And the last point is about the stipend. So most PhD programs in North America are fully covered. Now, the catch here, though, is that in some schools, they require you to either teach or do TAing as part of the stipend. So you're not going to be paid extra money for TAing, your stipend just comes out of it. That was something I did not want to do because I didn't want to spend 30 hours a week teaching, not get extra money for it, but feel like I have to do it because I need my stipend money. That would make my PhD experience really, really difficult because it will really cut down how much time you have to actually do your PhD, right? So definitely be on the lookout for it. That is a very scary situation to be in without knowing. So ask your supervisor, like, do you mandate your students to do TAing? And like, does any of their stipend come out of that? In Europe, a lot of places don't have guaranteed stipend. I didn't go through the whole like European PhD process, but that is something you should try to do a lot of research into before you commit. Like, don't go there thinking that, oh, it's guaranteed PhD stipend, but turns out only first year was covered, the last two are not. That would make things really, really difficult for you. I believe there's a question here. Does university website help with the second question? Yeah, I tried to use the university website to kind of like narrow down my second question, like how many labs are doing things that I'm interested in doing. All right, now moving
And
on.
one thing for the second question is that usually, like, each like department website would have like a list of all the professors who are working in the department, and if you got like to the link for each professor, you'll find the corresponding like lab website, so you can just see what they're working on.
Yeah. And that's also the same website that I use to find current students in the lab. So really like going through lab websites is very, very helpful. You can also see what kind of journals they publish in and like what are some of those, what is the lab currently working on mostly. Another point I wanted to make here is that kind of deciding whether or not you want to, what are your like future goals and whether or not you want to be in academia long term can really also help you shortlist some of these schools because you'll see that, oh, like if a lot of alumni from this school become a PI or there's a lot of alumni from this school have like a startup, that can also be very useful for you to like, narrow down. But also that is something that will come with like, while you're doing your PhD, you will probably develop like interest in areas that you didn't think you had the interest in. So obviously be open, but also be aware of like, oh, these are what the alumni tend to do, or like these are the kind of opportunities I would definitely have access to if I went there. All right, now in terms of timeline, you should definitely be looking into like shortlisting schools and like talking to potential PIs by September. A lot of the scholarships have an October 1st deadline. And so if you want to meet that deadline, it might be helpful for you to talk to like, kind of shortlist these schools before that. Most of these applications also have a December 1st deadline. Also, these timelines are mostly applicable for North America. In Europe, the timelines are a little bit more different. In UK, I believe they are on a more rolling basis, and some of the schools also has like a three terms as opposed to like a two-term program. All right. Common mistakes to avoid. Writing not personal statement. So something that I had already mentioned, but really make sure that your research interests are very specific. In your personal statement, I always liked mentioning which labs I would want to work with and why I want to work with them, because that really drives a point home, like why you want to join the specific university. Another one is, applying to universities where you don't have a lot of interest in their faculty. Like if you just go to a school for their prestige and if you start rotating in a lab. So a lot of the schools in US, they don't admit you to one lab. You're going to be admitted and then you'll have to rotate through like, 3, 4 different labs before you select one lab. And so if you come in here and then you do a bunch of rotations and then you realize, oh, none of these labs are the right fit for me, then most of the time people have to like drop out of their PhD, or they tend to get a master's and then they just leave. So if you want to avoid doing that, you shouldn't be committing to a school where you don't have a lot of labs that you like. And definitely talk to the current students. That is super important. And especially from like when I was interviewing, I learned so much from the current students and made me realize, oh, this is definitely not a lab I want to join. There's so many scenarios that might come up that you might have never thought is even possible in a research or in an academic setting. So you should definitely be talking to the current students, learning about the working environment, because you are committing 5 to 6 years of your life there. And definitely research the city and the university. Making sure that your stipend is enough for you to live in that city is a very important thing, because otherwise you don't really want to be taking out loans. That's going to be a very, very difficult process for you as an international student, right? All right, I think that's kind of all that I had, and I am always happy to answer any questions. You can reach out to me on email or on LinkedIn if you have specific questions, or you're like, okay, these are my experiences. How do I write a personal statement? Or like you just want someone to sit down with you and like help you shortlist universities. Happy to do any of that. So please feel free to reach out, email me, or message me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to answer any questions.
I'll stop the recording for now, and then we can have the question and answers.